Hello, Year 10 and 11. This is going to be your Language Paper 1, Question 3 revision video. On the screen, you'll notice that I've got a kind of image of blocks being built, and that's what I want us to think of and have in the back of our head when we think about the structure question, because it's literally like the writer building up the story bit by bit in order for us to make sense to us, to affect us, to have clarity. And that might help you open up this question. So my big question is, why is it so scary? This is the question that I feel students find the most terrifying. And I'm going to just tell you that when you really know what you're doing, hint, hint, it isn't at all. And hopefully by the end of this video, some of your fears will be alleviated. I then want you to think, well, what is it? Give yourself a second here to think about that. And what it is literally the organisation of a text. And I'm just going to remind you of that image that I put up earlier, of this being the building blocks of it. That structure, I think, how does it open? And then I ask myself this big question, why? So every time I make a point, I think, why? Because if I'm not thinking why, then I'm not really analysing what the writer has done. I'm simply stating fact. Then I go into what is the main focus. And again, I ask myself, why? Have they drawn my eyes and my attention to the protagonist or an antagonist? Are they focusing on the setting? And why? Why? What does that do? Then, what is introduced and how does it change the dynamic of the text? Has a new character been introduced? Has time changed? Has there been a temporal shift? And again, as you've noticed, why? And then how does it end? Does it feel similar to the beginning? Is it entirely different in tone? Does the writer repeat an image to give it that wonderful cyclical idea? And then obviously again, you know it, why? Now we're thinking about these structural devices, and it's not the same as language devices, which I think most students feel more comfortable with. Those are your similes, your metaphors, your alliteration, whatever it is. So what are structural devices? Well, I've not got every structural device here, but I've got a handful that I think would support most people. You're thinking about foreshadowing when the writer hints something to us. Linear structure, meaning it's chronological, as in A, B, C, D. Cyclical structure, think about Inspector Calls, it goes round in that wonderful circle. Prolepsis, which is a fancy way of saying flash forward, you can say either. Analepsis, which is a fancy way of saying flashback, once again you could say either. Media res, when we start off thrown in the middle of the action. And motifs, when we have repeated images throughout, and obviously any shifts in the text. Please take a second to note this down. Right, so we're going to now start reading through. I'm going to at times not read all of it, but I just want you to look. So obviously you would have looked at your questions. I always start with question 4, by the way, and then, work my way back up. Question 3 is often written as, how has the writer structured the extract to interest you as a reader? Now, the big thing, as I always say to all my students, do not write. It makes the reader want to read on, because that makes absolutely no sense. It's an empty comment. And it just seems to be kind of one of those vague, empty ideas that gets thrown around and doesn't really answer the question or in any meaningful or impactful way. What I always do read, however, is a little context box at the beginning because it's super important. It says here, the extract is from a novel by Yin Martel. In this section, the central character, Pi, is on a sinking ship. The ship is carrying the animals belonging to Pi's father, who owns a zoo. So, just from that, I know that the ship is sinking. Now, if I hadn't used that to read it, when I start reading the extract, I might be slightly confused as to what's going on. But instead, by knowing what's happening here, it means that I can delve into the text and have a little bit of an understanding of it. Also, it being from the novel means that it's from a larger piece of work, which is also helpful. So it's not a short story where I'm reading the entirety of it. I'm reading a section, and that could be helpful as well. It might also tell you, it doesn't with this one, where in the novel it's from, if it's at the beginning, in the middle, or the end. This feels for me, because of what's happening in here with the sinking ship, this feels to be more in the middle for me, and I certainly that would definitely impact what I'm thinking. So it starts off, inside the ship there were noises, deep structural groans. I stumbled and fell, no harm done. I got up. With the help of handrails, I went down the stairwell 4 steps at a time. I'm going to pause there. I just say, what do we notice and why? So what I love about this is that it kind of drops us in instantly into this kind of being inside of the ship. And from us knowing that the ship is sinking and us dropping into inside the ship, we instantly get into this world of fear and trepidation. We instantly feel a little bit of sympathy and closeness to the character of Pi because he's lost. Also, one of the most beautiful things here is that the writer uses Pi as the narrative voice. It's written from a first-person narrative, meaning it's like he's recollecting and telling us. So we're kind of being drawn into his world and immersed into this quite frightening and dangerous moment. So I'll continue reading, and then I'm looking for my big shift. By big shift, I mean something new has to happen. Either there is something new in the tone of the text, either a new character gets introduced, or a new voice gets introduced, or something big happens, or even something small. Some of us may use the phrase, it's our inciting incident. You can just tell me what the big shift is, because both of those things do the same thing. So I go up, I ran up the stairs, I go to the main deck. The weather wasn't entertaining anymore. I was very afraid. Now it was plain and obvious the ship was listing badly. And it wasn't level the other way either. There was a noticeable incline from bow to stern. I looked overboard. The water didn't look to be entirely feet away. The ship was sinking. My mind could hardly conceive it. It was as unbelievable as the moon catching fire. Now, there are a few things that happen here. And if I'm trying to be quite clever, which you're all going to be very clever, I might talk about the fact that it doesn't tell us the ship was sinking until here. Okay, that's the first time it really clearly states that. So what we call that is withholding information, because essentially we already know that the ship is about to sink, but it keeps us up and it keeps us up, it keeps us up, and then we have this very simple sentence, the ship is sinking, and we go, oh, okay, that's definitely what we thought. However, there is other structural moments here with the big shift. So it starts with, where were the officers and the crew? Where were they going? Towards the bow, I saw some men running in the gloom. This is the first time we start to get introduced to other characters. So we're getting a bigger picture of the chaotic nature of the world that Pi has found himself in. So if I was looking at another big shift, I'd probably look in that section, that final bit. On the screen here, because what I would look at is this idea of the fact that we're now not looking at just the ship, but we're looking at all of those around the ship, and we're getting this feeling of chaos. People are running around, and he texts of, I thought I heard the men shouting, and we have this idea of him thinking he's heard this or hearing this, and we get the idea of the chaos. And for now, the chaos seems to have grown and grown and grown, and we're getting to somewhat of a climactic moment. Now, I always think another shift. I'm going to be honest with you, I only like to discuss 3 to 4 shifts. Why? Because it's 8 marks and it's 10 minutes you're going to be spending. And I'd rather you do 3, maximum 4 really well than try and do loads in that time and then ruin your timing for question 4 or even question 5. So you need to be clever with your time. So I might see if there's another mini shift here. And again, what, how, why? So again, what I might talk about is the whole entire, there's this like mix, this like myriad of questions here. What was it? Was it this? Was it that? What is it that? And you could talk about the pace in this moment increasing and increasing and increasing, again getting this very climactic feeling. I would also talk about, again, this idea of the word sinking being used here. Now, I'm not going to use sinking and zoom in on the word, but I might say the fact that the writer discusses the sinking at one point and then brings it back again, reiterates the kind of fear and anxiety that Pi is feeling and how he wants us as a reader to feel as well. And then we even have this, I clearly heard, so we again get this idea of the chaos of the ship going further and further. First of all, he thinks it's the men shouting. Now he hears monkeys shrieking and so forth. And then we get this beautiful line, who in God's name had let it out? So you may want to talk about this kind of fear and anxiety, and even kind of reaching up to this idea when he says, who in God's name? He's like questioning massively, but he's also speaking to us. He is truly terrified, and we can feel that with the, as I've said, myriad of questions, but that question particularly at the end really is rather provocative because it's making us really see the fear and anxiety that he is feeling. Right, then I look at the end. So remember, it talks about the whole extract. So it's always very important to look at the beginning. I go for my 2 mini shifts in the middle and the end. And again, I ask myself, what and why? So we're going to look at the final part here. Talks about one of the men interrupted me by thrusting a life jacket into my arms and shouting something in Chinese. I noticed an orange whistle dangling from the life jacket. The men were nodding vigorously at me. When they took hold of me and lifted me in their strong arms, I thought nothing of it. I thought they were helping me. I was so full of trust that I felt grateful as they carried me in the air. Only when they threw me overboard did I begin to have doubts. Okay. The ending almost feels slightly like a cliffhanger because this idea of him being thrown overboard. And what I love about this extract is that it's structured in a way that this idea of this tension and urgency only seems to get more and more heightened. It almost reverberates across, okay? And you could even ask yourself where the most dramatic moment is. Is it the middle when he's talking, who in God's name, or is it towards the end? And why has the writer done that? For me, it actually ends on this very intense manner, and it ends, as I've said, almost in a cliffhanger, where the fear and anxiety that the narrator felt at the beginning seems to be continued all the way through. Right, so we've got a model answer here, okay? Now, I'm going to be kind of making notes along with the model answer just so we can have a look. So the first thing I want us to look at is the fact it starts with the linear structure. Sorry, my drawing hand is really bad there. So it mentions a structural technique. But then this is the important thing. It says enables the writer to quickly immerse. You mentioned the technique. Yes, that's a great, wonderful one. Give that a tick. But then you need to say what it does. Otherwise, you are not going to get more than like 3 out of 8, okay? If that. And it says here, enables the writer to quickly immerse the reader into the wintry landscape and Zoe's emotional experience. Great. I've said what it does, and I've given my why. The descriptive details of the snow, mountain air, and pine resin are presented in a chronological sequence. Notice again, I've said something here. Chronological sequence and linear are pretty much, one and the same thing, but it's still important, which instantly transports the reader. Let's get that instantly transports the reader, because that's important, into the scene. The writer gradually builds the atmosphere and tone of the passage, moving the reader through a description of the snowfall, the crackling cold, and the mountain range, enabling, again notice that, the tone to shift from quiet contemplation to one of exhilaration and empowerment as Zoe prepares to skill downhill. The linear structure also enables the writer to foreshadow future aspects of the narrative. Foreshadowing, as I mentioned earlier, is a structural technique, but again, why have they done it? Phrases like, now I want you to notice where I use my quote here. She almost thought that she could die in the place and happily, and rehearsal and pre-echo of death. Now, I didn't write this one, first of all. It's a model answer from a student that I found, and I think it's really good. One thing I would probably say to this student is, when they talk about the foreshadowing, they need to say why, and also, what I'm like. I like my quotes short and snappy. But here, it's not too much of a worry because you're not zooming into language. And they say are introduced sequentially, again, that chronological, building suspense, why, and anticipation within the reader for what is about to occur. Why? So this is a good answer. There are certain things I would make sure to do just to add on to make sure it gets the full marks, the 8 out of 8. And definitely I would probably use slightly shorter quotes all the way through. Also, what you need to do as well is there's moments here where it talks about the quiet contemplation. I just want to think about why and what is the effect there on the reader. Is it for us to feel kind of close to the character of Zoe, the protagonist? Is it for us to kind of question the further surroundings? Is it a much more complex thing going on there? Is there some sort of kind of emotional manipulation going on there where the writer wants us to feel a certain way in order to later on shock us into feeling something else? Now you're going to try and write one yourself. I've got loads of sentence starters here. It's not in a particular order. It might be nice to start with the writer hooks us in, or at first the writer uses to establish, but I've got loads here. Why don't you pause this for about 5 minutes and just try writing? Okay, and then I'm going to show you one that I've written and you're going to compare it, learn something from it, and be on your merry way. Right, this is mine. So I've said instantly the writer places us in the chaotic world of the text. I like the word instantly because it's kind of telling me that it's the beginning of the extract. And remember the fact that you need to look at the whole extract. Establishing, remember my why, at once a sense of frenzy and anxiety. The writer employs an almost staccato tone to the text, with the first-person narrator reporting each moment in a rather matter-of-fact manner. However, this does not alleviate. So I always like a however because you're showing that you're thinking about it from more than one perspective. You might feel comfortable doing this for language devices, but if you do it for structural devices, it will only improve your quality of writing. However, this does not alleviate the immensity of the situation, but rather ensures that we stay close to each moment of the text. The first shift occurs with the narrator asking for the men. By opening our focus to other characters, we witness his lack of power, as well as his relative isolation on the ship. Each time I'm linking it back to why they have done that and what it does to us. Well, I hope this was enjoyable and helpful, and I'm going to be coming out with a question for very soon. Have a good evening and best of luck.